Hello, I am Charlie Falconer. I am a Labour peer and I was the Secretary of State for Justice from 2003 to 2007. The public is entitled to feel that the state is doing everything that it can to protect the public from terrorists. Over the last decade, we have failed as a country to put in place a proper terrorism sentencing framework, and I think the sentencing framework should have two bits to it. One, if somebody is convicted of a terrorist offence, they should only be released if the parole board thinks they're safe to be released, and secondly, much greater effort needs to be put into seeking to de-radicalise people once they are in prison. Everybody with experience of terrorists in prison is aware that very frequently leaders grow up amongst the community in prison, some of whom have committed terrorist offences, some of whom haven't, in which people are persuaded either to remain radical in their approach or to become radical. The state needs to ensure that there are people putting the contrary point of view and taking steps to try to de-radicalise, wean people off a commitment to a whole range of groups that we find completely repulsive in this country. Of course it's not going to succeed in every case, and equally in some cases people will say it succeeded when it hasn't. But there being no countervailing pressure from, for example, Iman saying the stuff that you, a prisoner, is hearing about why you should be taking on the state, killing women and children, killing people within the United Kingdom, that's wrong. You need people putting the contrary view and trying to persuade people to be weaned off that particular approach. So we need the parole board looking at everybody who's been a terrorist convictee before they get out, and we need de-radicalisation programs. Because we haven't had the right sentencing framework over the last decade, we're now in a position where there are maybe 50 convicted terrorists about to come out of prison, and the parole board are not going to have a look to see whether they're safe to do so. The government has just proposed a bill which has just got through the Commons, which retrospectively increases the time that they spend in prison from half of their sentence to 2/3 of their sentence, and only allows them to be released before the end of their sentence if the parole board say it's safe. I think it's probably okay for the parole board to look at their cases before they are released, but there is a fundamental principle of law that you don't make something criminal which wasn't criminal at the time the offence was committed, and there's another fundamental principle that says you don't, by legislation or other change in the law, increase the sentence that somebody has already received from the courts. And the reason that you don't do that is because tyrannies, when they want to get their enemies, they create a criminal offence of something they'd already done, convict them of that and sentence them to a period in prison, and then when it looks like they're about to get released, you then pass an act of parliament or whatever the foreign equivalent is, so they have to stay in prison for a bit longer. What you're doing in those cases is not having the courts decide who goes to prison, you're having the politicians decide who goes to prison. And what then happens is it's not the rule of law that determines what happens to people, it's the rule of public opinion. Now, I'm absolutely sure that the public do require to be protected from very many of the 50 who might be released, but by doing it in this retrospective legislation way, which offends against that basic principle, we're going about it in a very dangerous way. I think there are other ways that it can be done. For example, when they are released, as they may have to be, it might be necessary for there to be something like control orders which make sure that they stay in a particular place, can't come out of their homes except at specified times, have got to notify the authorities when they come out, can't communicate with other people who might be dangerous. Control orders, in effect, to make sure that the public is protected. But if we go down the route of acts of parliament lengthening sentences that have already been passed by the courts, we are going down a road that we have always previously turned our face against, because it is the act of tyrannies, not the acts of countries that rule by the rule of law. So I'm very strongly in favour of the toughest possible penalties for terrorists, and I'm more than happy for a new sentencing framework to be applied to people who are convicted in the future. But I am very uneasy about this process of passing an act of Parliament to lengthen the sentence of people who are already in prison.